Hello and welcome to the Daily Atheist Morning Show. It is, what is it? It is the Thursday? It is Thursday. I knew that. I was testing you. It is Thursday, the 25th of June, 2020. How are you doing this morning? I am ready for the weekend. I don't know about you guys, but I'm ready for the weekend. I have got my co-host, Keithan. Keithan. I've never heard that one. Ethan Micheal. How are you doing this morning, Ethan? Good morning.
I'm good. I like the name, Keith.
I rename everybody. Apparently, it's a I don't know, some kind of autism spectrum thing for me, I guess. Good morning, Ethan. How are you doing?
Good. Yourself?
Good.
Happy to be back.
Yes. Ethan, of course, for those of you who don't know, is your friendly neighborhood atheist. He's the host of your friendly neighborhood atheist channel, and he's got a lot of other things going on. Does other things as far as streaming. He produces other videos for other shows and stuff like that. The 13th Percent comes to mind. It's a great show. We have also got don't tell me, I'm gonna say this right, Jason Foux with us this morning.
Yes, and you pronounced my last name correctly. That is awesome.
Awesome. Jason is the host of the
right.
No, but I had to ponder upon it we talked about it last time. I cheated. So you are the host of the Dragons in Genesis podcast.
That is correct.
Yes, nice to have you again. Last time you were on the show, you were in a truck.
Yes, I was, because all the little scheduling issues and everything. I ended up out on the road at the time that we were doing the show, and I was in the parking lot of a truck stop, hoping to catch some internet signal, and I was for a little bit, and then it all just died.
Oh, yes. Well, it got us through at least most of the show. I think it was a pretty good show, really. It was a lot of fun.
We went over about 45 minutes or something? It was a lot.
Yeah, we do that every now and then. On the fun ones. Yeah, we can't sometimes with Ethan because Ethan, he's got a real job. You have a real job too. I mean, compared to me.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody in the chat. Justin, the empathetic atheist, the blazing wizard pope is here. Edouard Chirac is joining us this morning. Good morning, tons of mice. Trina DeLuca, everybody. Just so many people already here this morning. So thank you all. I hope you're ready for the weekend. I hope you're staying safe and cootie free. Also, I got to remember to do that. I want to say hi to everybody who's watching on, because I usually just talk to the YouTube people. That's where I grew up, but we also stream to Facebook and other things. So we about 16 or 17 Facebook pages and groups now. So hello to everybody on Facebook and also to Twitch. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Hi, guys.
How's it going?
Do you put a YouTube link in your Facebook descriptions to try and direct people to YouTube?
See, that's wonderful that you asked. I actually did that yesterday. So this is the first show that has a link at the top of the description in YouTube. You can see and just click over and watch you on YouTube. So if you're watching on Facebook and you want to get more involved in the chat, you can click on the link and pop over to YouTube and watch with everybody. Well, I think it pops you to my YouTube channel though, because when I build the show, I don't actually have the link for the show until after I build the show, and I couldn't. Anyway, it's complicated, but trust me, pop over there and do the thing. You can find me. So yeah, it's a great question, Ethan. I'm glad you mentioned that because yes, just now we started doing that. Oh. And I'd like to possibly compare and contrast maybe which Facebook groups I stream into with the Facebook groups you stream into, and we could talk about that later. Anyway, Dragons in Genesis. That sounds so cool.
That's me.
It does. It's a really cool name.
It's kind of like a jab at Ken Ham and his answers in Genesis. Mm-hmm. When I first started working on the podcast, since I'm focused more on the mythology that you find in the Hebrew text, I thought that the Bible is a great place to go to look for mythology, and Ken Ham thinks it's a great place to go if you're looking for answers, and I think that's just a horrible idea. And that's where the name came from. It's a little jab at our favorite Australian with a giant boat in Kentucky.
Well, it's wonderful. It was yes, absolutely perfect opportunity for a good name. Dragons in Genesis. I mean, just because of everything involved.
Yeah.
And then whenever you throw it back at him.
Yeah, right?
Yes, absolutely. So Trina DeLuca, she has a question from the chat. Good morning, Casa Mufasa. Thank you for the $2 of support for the channel. Good morning. Thank you. Welcome to the damnation. Yeah, I'm stealing that from it's Native Atheist. He threw the damnation at me the other day, and I was like, hell yeah, I'm stealing it. So I'm stealing it. It's just happening. Trina wanted to ask if someone also does comment from Twitter or Facebook, do I see it? Do we see it? Well, not really. I tried to. There is a unified chat that I tried. I'll show you guys. You've seen it last week. I didn't have it set. Well, the problem with the unified chat, it doesn't seem to bring everything over from YouTube. It's behind out of, so I could put it up there. Let me show you here. Just briefly for those who give a damn. So there's the unified chat. You guys probably saw it last week. I usually had it bigger like this, and some of it shows up. The others show up, but not everything shows up. So whenever I can get that fixed, that's why I'm actually watching it up in this screen to compare. And whenever I get that fixed to where it shows up everything from YouTube, then I'll start using it, and everybody will be able to chat with everybody. So sorry for the distraction. Let me get our regular chat back. Boom, boom, boom. That's our regular chat. So yeah, that's us. That's the chat in a nutshell, Trina. So I'll get that fixed as soon as I can or figure it out. But that's just kind of as best as it has. Actually, right now I have Facebook and YouTube open. If you go back and watch some of our videos, in order to see the chat for Facebook, I have to open the Facebook. I can't mute it before the show. I have Facebook. So sometimes during the last shows, you'll hear me have to open Facebook during the show in order to chat with the people. And in doing that, I need to fade that back. Sorry, guys. In doing that, you'll hear the echo of the show come back over the thing when Facebook opens, and I have to mute it real quickly. So it's kind of as I'm learning how to do Facebook, but now I actually have to do that so I can see some of the Facebook chat. If you're subscribed and you're watching through the Daily Atheist Facebook page, which I did now put a link down below. Thank you, Ethan, again. That's probably the next question. I did put a link to my Daily Atheist. So if you want to watch on Facebook, go to the description, click on there, and you can get to my Facebook proper, and I can actually chat with you. But if you're watching on one of the extraneous groups, I may not be able to chat with you. So all that, enough geek talk. So let me real quick, you mentioned something in a message, Jason, about the story of Gilgamesh and the Asherah Mary connection.
Yeah, those were two things that were popping up in the chat the last time I was on, right before the internet just died. Those are actually two very important parts of understanding a great deal of the Bible. Are these myths, these earlier and older myths that much of the Bible is based on. Which one do you want to do first? Asherah Mary or Gilgamesh and the Bible?
Do you have an opinion, Ethan? Because I actually have a preference.
The preference is your choice.
Awesome. Thank you. I would like to hear that because, everybody knows, pardon me if you're everybody and you don't know this, everybody knows the Noah-Gilgamesh connection. I'm not really familiar myself with the Mary-Asherah connection. So could you enlighten us?
Okay, yeah. So this is, I'm not going to say it's exactly new, but it is an idea that has been gaining a lot of traction in the past couple of decades as more and more scholars are coming to the realization that more figures in the Bible are based on fictional characters than, earlier scholars wanted to admit. This first popped up with like Moses. People were like, oh, Moses is just, a reworking of older gods. And then people said no, and some people lost their jobs at universities, yada, yada, yada. Now it's just accepted that most of the people in the Old Testament never existed. And now they're starting to realize the same could be true with the New Testament as well. And the first thing you need to understand about the Asherah and Mary connection is that Jewish mythology came out of Canaanite mythology. There's not really a reason to distinguish the two. The Jews did not invade Canaan and drive all the people out. That never happened. That's a fictive history that was invented much, much later, sometime after the Babylonian exile. The Israelites were a group of Canaanites. And the story about them being at war with the Canaanites, that was sort of an effort to distance themselves from their old polytheistic roots. Say, oh yeah, we totally never did that. That was a whole different group of people, and it was just their grandparents. That's what that's about. So Jewish mythology came from Canaanite mythology, and in Canaanite mythology, you had a whole pantheon of deities. And the three that are important to this discussion are El Elyon, which is it translates to God Most High. When you read the Bible and you see God with a capital G, that's what it's saying. It's saying El Elyon. This is a Canaanite god. Think of him like Zeus. Okay,
Zeus.
He's the father of the pantheon. He created the universe and a bunch of other stuff. Then you have Asherah. Asherah is El Elyon's wife. This would be sort of like Hera, and
Okay.
she is this great like mother god, symbol of fertility. She's called the Queen of Heaven, the Mother of God, the Spirit of Wisdom, and a bunch of other things. Okay, and together, their first son, Asherah had 70 sons. The first one was a bunch, though in some manuscripts she is considered to still be a virgin. So we actually have this perpetual virginity despite having 70 sons, and we don't even know how many daughters.
Wow.
Yeah, a bunch. But, I mean, she's a goddess. She can do that.
She can do that, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
And then their favorite son, their first son, though in some versions of the legend, he's not their first son. He's later, and some he's actually a grandson, whatever. Their favorite son is a god called Baal Hadad, or some people say Baal. This is Baal. And this is a god of war and storms and grain. He's sort of like a land fertility god. You want a good harvest, you're going to make sacrifices to Baal Hadad. You want to be successful in battle, same thing. You don't want the storms to ruin your crops. Well, now you got a problem, because that's kind of what he does. So he kind of has a love-hate relationship with your land. And there's an interesting legend about that. But those are the three you need to understand for this. El Elyon, the God Most High, his wife Asherah, the Queen of Heaven, and their son Baal Hadad, who's wrapped up with grain and stuff like that. Baal would later be renamed Yahweh in the Canaanite myths. This goes back to like 1200 BC. And people don't like to talk about that for obvious reasons. Now, Asherah, she's linked with fertility and motherhood and wisdom, and her symbols, of this goddess include a winged sun, a spindle, a woman dressed in like bright, like glowing, usually like yellow or red robes, and a massive fruit tree.
Right.
And if you're thinking there may be a connection between a massive fruit tree and a spirit of wisdom with the Garden of Eden, then you're on the right track, because there is a giant connection with that, but that's something else. Anyway, so the Israelites, they knew about and for a time worshipped Asherah, all the way up till at least the 7th century BC, but probably later. But eventually they did a big expungement where they got rid of all their old gods and only kept Yahweh and El Elyon, and those two were sort of merged. But you can see her in like Jeremiah 44, Proverbs 22, Isaiah 7, where she's actually linked with the Emmanuel prophecy that Christians later used for Jesus, Malachi 4, and a few other places. And they actually had giant poles to Asherah, called Asherah poles, that were part of the decoration of the Jerusalem temple. So she was quite prominent. Now, the second thing to understand is that the Jews and Christians, they loved taking stories about their old polytheistic gods and rewriting them to be about people. And that's actually where many of your Bible stories come from. So like Samson in the book of Judges, he was originally a sun god named Shamash, and most of his stories are talking about things that this sun god would do. And your Jonah and the giant fish is actually a sort of historicized retelling of Yahweh battling Leviathan at the beginning of creation, in which both of them die, but Yahweh eventually resurrects 3 days later and then uses the corpse of Leviathan to create the firmament. The same thing happened with Moses and Joshua, Abraham, Isaac, Jesus, you name it. It was stories of gods, and they set them in history and pretended they were people because they liked all these polytheistic stories. They didn't want to get rid of them, but they were becoming monotheistic. So they couldn't have stories about gods. So they changed them. They made them about people. So if you were to do this with the goddess Asherah, this queen of heaven, and you wanted her story to take place in this sort of, first century AD atmosphere, and you wanted it to be set in history. And they often did this where it was not just part of history, but part of their formative history, part of their religion's origin story, connected with the identity of the people. So if you wanted to do that with Asherah, you would have to just go through and take some of her details. Like, she nurses a divine king. This would be the king of Canaan. And that's a very important link. Okay. And we would need to make sure that is in there. And this king is, this divine king is also linked with the earthly king. And we have that with Jesus. Mary nurses Jesus, and Jesus is linked, I think, 3 different ways with the earthly king: through his genealogy, making him a descendant from David, being named King of the Jews at his crucifixion, and through the nature renewal ritual that was used by ancient kings, which the crucifixion is designed to represent. And this was actually specifically done in Canaan with the king of places like Ugarit. And this king would represent the god Baal-Hadad, who is another parallel to Jesus. And this king, this son of Asherah, was called the morning star and the evening star, which basically meant the beginning and the end. Like the first star to appear in the sky in the morning, and the first star to appear in the evening sky, or I'm sorry, the last star that you could still see in the morning, and the first star in the at night. It meant the beginning and the end. And we have this exact same thing with Jesus. He's called the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And so Asherah's favorite son was Baal, who was renamed to Yahweh. As I mentioned earlier, Isaiah 7, maybe 7:14, we actually have Asherah being called the mother of Yahweh. Now, don't go looking for it in your King James version. You won't find it. But if you look at older versions of the Bible, it is in there.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
I just real quick want to mention somebody in the channel or in the YouTube asked if you had a YouTube channel. Jason does not have a YouTube channel, I don't believe, but he does have the Dragons in Genesis podcast. So if you want to, I've got links down below if you want to pop up and follow him down there. He's got lots of awesome knowledge stuff.
Why don't you have a YouTube channel?
See, I've been trying.
It takes a lot of work. And
it's true.
I already work 70 hours a week, and then I have to do all the research for the podcast. It makes my head hurt.
He doesn't have a puck. He doesn't have a puck.
Right, I don't have a puck. I don't have a puck. I have a pup, and he takes even more of my time into it.
What you could do, so this is what I do, and I'm not saying you need to do this. I'll record my streams like through StreamYard, and then I'll upload them to the podcast site later. So you could record your podcast at the same time you record your video.
I do that too.
Yeah, I've considered it. I may go into that in the future.
Peer pressure. Do it. We need more atheist YouTubers.
Yeah, after the show is over, I'll download it, add a front to it and an end to it, similar to what we see on the show here, and I'll re-upload it to the podcast. I have to admit though, I've been a bad Chris, and I haven't done that in a month.
Shame.
Bad Chris. And I got daily content, and I don't put it. Bad Chris. Okay, Asherah. Mary.
Yeah. So in Isaiah 7, Asherah is called the mother of Yahweh. And that would be very important. We would want to see something similar to that with Mary if they were to put her into history. And her son is named Jesus or Yeshua, which recalls the name Yahweh. It basically means like Yahweh saves, and so we have this theophoric name linking Jesus with Yahweh. And so we have, another parallel between Asherah and Mary.
Okay, so let me ask you, are you specifically a mythicist then? You don't believe Mary and Jesus actually Oh, sorry.
No. You're good. That's what I was
Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, so at first I wasn't. When I first started doing the podcast and for the first like 10 years that I was a non-believer, I thought that there was like a real Jesus, some kind of priest or prophet or whatever who kind of got the ball rolling. But the more I've looked into it, and the more I've looked at how these myths evolve and also what the earliest Christians believed, the less likely it seems to me. And it really seems that the earliest Christians were sort of like mythicists. They believed that all of this was things that took place up in the heavens and didn't even believe in a Jesus on earth. It was all like he was like this great like archangel. And it wasn't until much later, possibly the beginning of the 2nd century, that they began holding this belief that it happened on land. Even the earliest gospel is written as a giant allegory, basically doing exactly this, where it takes events that they believe take place in heaven and pretending they take place on land, which was a popular style of writing within certain sects of Judaism. I mean, we have a great deal of that. This idea that heaven and earth are mirror images of one another that existed for many centuries. And so if you wanted to talk about something that happened in heaven, you could spell it out as if it took place on earth. And they understood it that way. They understood that heaven and earth were, it was almost like shadow puppets. When you see Mary walking around on earth, that's not Mary. That's the shadow of the little, Asherah up in heaven, and that's what that was. And so when you write something like the Gospel of Mark, they're not actually saying this stuff happened on earth. They're talking about an event that took place in heaven, but on the surface reading, it looks like it's on earth because you're meant to understand these things in multiple layers. Now, was the whole point of mystery religions. You understood the thing on the surface, and then as you learned more was revealed to you, and you got a greater understanding, and you saw the story behind the story. It was multi-layered like that. And so, the earliest Christians didn't seem to believe that there was a Jesus on earth. And by proxy, Mary or Joseph or, even your 12 disciples, those all seem to be based off of fictional characters as well.
I see. Well, in a lot of cases, then we should have, whenever we're talking about the stories where so there's a story of a god or a goddess who does A, B, and C. So now we're going to write a story of Bob and Cindy who do A, B, and C-ish on the ground.
Right.
So we should have those stories, shouldn't we? The original stories that tell about the fight between Jesus and the spirits between the moon and earth, or you know what I'm talking about? You're more familiar. We should have those original stories, shouldn't we?
Yeah,
somewhere.
And we do.
Okay, yeah.
They're not included in the canonical Bible because by that point, that was embarrassing to them. And there was a great effort by early Christians to delete a great deal of Christian text. The majority of Christian texts that were lost didn't come from a Roman persecution. It came from Christians stamping out earlier versions of Christianity.
Right. Well, see, the Christian, that's what I'm asking though. The first Christian Jesus part of stuff, was that Christian or Jewish? I thought they were Jewish myths that these were based on.
Right. And so
we should have the Jewish tales telling the story somewhere about Jesus fighting a battle or some spiritual creature fighting a battle between blah, 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 blah.
Right. And I think one of the one of the disconnects here is that we're making a distinction between Jewish and Christian. And at the time, there was no such distinction. These were the earliest Christians were
Jews,
sectarian Jews. They were Jews. They were people like the Essenes and the Ebionites and the Samaritans, and it seems to have evolved out of that. And they were just sort of rewriting their old myths in new ways to give them a new understanding to fit with the current political and social climate. And later, a distinction was being made. But yeah, the myths about, about all of this stuff that the Gospels are based on, we actually do have that. And when you read it, and then you go and you read the canonical text, then you can read them in a whole new light, and you can understand them in the same context that the earliest Christians understood these texts. And then when you do that, basically when you read the Judeo-Christian scriptures in order, it basically is telling you Jesus is a sky spirit who was never on earth. And that's what did it. That's one of the things that did it for me is when I read it the way, or at least as close as I can come to the way they understood it, it's like, oh, they didn't believe in a historical Jesus. That's much, much later. They didn't even have those writings at the time.
Gotcha.
So,
I've seen the work by Dr. Carrier, and I've had Dr. Carrier on the show, and I even told him somewhere in the show, I was like, I gotta be honest, I am now a mythicist. I kind of believe your view of things because I've seen your stuff and I've seen other stuff related to that. But I have to be honest, I have not seen contrary work. I've not gone and watched Bart Ehrman. I don't know what his thing is. And there are other people. Divine Disbelief is another YouTube channel. And Nathan over at Divine Disbelief, apparently, to my understanding, is extremely passionate that Jesus was a real person.
Right. I was actually going to bring that up. I was curious on what are your thoughts, Dragons of Genesis, on atheists who are adamant that Jesus of Nazareth did exist and that there is reliable historical information to show that?
So that kind of segues into a discussion about Bart Ehrman, which Bart Ehrman is basically his arguments are what drove the final nail into the coffin for me. Bart Ehrman convinced me that Jesus never existed. And here's why. Bart Ehrman is the leading expert on early Christian formation. I mean, his books are brilliant. The man is a genius. And when you read any of his stuff like Forged and Counterforged, or you listen to any of his lectures, he has quite a few through the Teaching Company. Amazing stuff. And the man is brilliant. But when you get to his work on the historic Jesus, all of a sudden he's contradicting himself. He's making fallacious arguments. It's just like one logical fallacy after another. He says, oh, well, he will actually say things that are completely untrue and that he knows are untrue because they've been pointed out to him.
Pardon me. I got distracted by the chat. We're talking about Carrier or Ehrman?
Ehrman.
Okay, carry on. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And so I went to him. I was like, because at the time I still thought, okay, well, there's got to be a historic Jesus, and everyone keeps talking about Bart Ehrman. So if anyone should know, it should be him. And when I listened to his arguments for it, it's arguments like, oh, well, every scholar believes that Jesus exists, which obviously is not true. Right. And then he'll say, oh, well, he'll make statements like the crucifixion is one of the things that we know for certain historically happened. And it's like, based on what evidence?
Well, wait.
He never addresses that.
They even have the do I have my mic? Yes, they even have the, what do you call it? The crown of thorns of Jesus. Surely it really wait. I'm sorry. They've got 6 of them.
yeah, right. Well, I guess like while he was like carrying the cross up the thing, it
they
fell
just
off,
change it out every now and then.
Yeah. You only use it every 100 yards. Everyone knows that.
Yes. Well, how many different churches, how many different Catholic churches claim to have the actual foreskin of baby Jesus?
Oh yeah, it's several. And
Right.
for a while there were multiple crossbeams touring the world, you know,
Yes.
and some of them are built
I can't
into
just head outside.
churches.
Okay. That was dramatic. Hope he's good. Awesome. He's got dogs barking. There we go. We'll keep him there whenever he gets back.
Like a mailman or something.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, so Bart Ehrman, when he starts talking about the historic Jesus, he doesn't discuss that topic the way he discusses everything else. He starts saying, oh, well, if you don't believe in him, then, you know, you're not a real scholar, you know. So he goes straight into like ad hominem attacks and just one thing after another. And I'm like,
really?
Listen to him carefully. He actually starts off one lecture by saying that doubting the historical Jesus is a bogus view, and like people who don't believe that are not real scholars. And it's like, what?
Really?
Like,
so he opens with logical fallacies.
Right. But only on that topic. He also says things like the Gospels are reliable historical documents. But then when he's talking about the Gospels, he's talking about how they are filled with redactions and contradictions and that they are not reliable for understanding history. So he actually contradicts himself. I'm not exactly sure why he does this. And Richard Carey actually sent him a list of PhD holding scholars who have PhDs in relevant fields who believe that Jesus was a myth. And he still says that there are no PhD scholars who believe in mythicism. You know, despite the fact that, you know, he argues with them all the time. So
isn't Richard Carey a PhD scholar who believes it? I mean, am I wrong?
You know, and Robert Hilton Price, who
the proof before me.
And I mean, the list goes on, and there's more coming up. And even if there weren't any, that is still a logical fallacy. You know, absolutely. No one disagrees with me, therefore it's right. Are you kidding me? And he only does this on that one topic. Nowhere else in any of his work does he do anything like it, which makes me think that he understands that the evidence isn't there because he never appeals to the evidence for the historical Jesus once. And that's what did it for me. When the man who should know, when the man who, if the evidence existed, would be able to point to it, has to resort to the same apologetic arguments as William Lane Craig. And that, I was like, so the best one who can argue for Jesus doesn't have anything to actually say about it. Gotcha. At least nothing valid, nothing other than fallacious arguments. And that's what kind of convinced me was there's not really an argument. I mean, there could be, but we don't have the evidence for a real Jesus yet. Right. And I think after 2,000 years of people desperately trying to prove it, we should have something. Instead, we have evidence that he didn't exist.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we got way sidetracked. Anyway, so back to
well, let's just welcome Ethan back real quick. Hello, Ethan. I hope everything is okay.
I am sitting here, so I have a window right next to where I'm at, and all of a sudden, on the edge of the window outside, I see my cat, who is an inside cat, just walking outside. I'm like, what the? How did he get out? I go running out. I get him in. This little shit pushed another window open.
Well, yeah.
Sorry, that was like a heart attack, man. I could not go without my cat. Like,
that's all right. No.
Yeah, all of a sudden, you panicked and ran. I was like, okay, I heard the dogs. I figured it was like a delivery man or something.
No, my cat was literally just standing outside the window.
That's not where they go.
No.
That's right. Fur babies are important. Any fur baby is welcome to appear on the show. I will tell this to any guest, whomever you are. I would rather have your dog on the show than you. So, or it's just how it is. So, I may have to do a dog show just for dogs. I got 4 of them, not 1 or 2 or 3, but 4 dogs in the credits. You'll see the dogs. I have a question for you, Jason.
Oh, go ahead.
From Kristen, best name ever, would like to know, have you looked into anything Dr. Francesca? I'm not even going to try that. All right. No, I will. Stavrokopoulou. I'm all right. I'm not going to try that. Miss Francesca S. from, I'm thinking Czechoslovakia or Russia. Do you know anything about that? Who she is?
No,
or
I
have
do
you heard?
not. I may have seen some books from that person, but I don't know. I'm not familiar with that individual.
I would have to now, because that's not really something that plagues my mind terribly often, whether Jesus existed or not. My position tends to be that it almost doesn't matter whether he existed. He didn't have any power. Even if he existed, he didn't have any power. The power they claim he had, he didn't have. So it doesn't really matter. Now, I could see how some man back in that time did something that impressed a certain sect of one of the Jewish cults.
Absolutely.
And I could see how those people would walk away from that and then apply an already known story to this man, as we've already discussed on the show. Oh man, Bob was really cool. We've got this story of like Zeus doing this thing. You know what, Bob? Was Zeus is come Bob? Zeus is Bob. You know what I mean? And so I could see them doing that. And so Jesus, being a real person, but not really Jesus. He wasn't Jesus at the time. He was just some guy, and they called him Jesus later. Right. You know, there's a lot of different things that can happen there. Apparently, some people are extremely passionate about this.
Yeah, and I'll say that the argument for the historical Jesus, that there was some itinerant prophet or something who kind of kickstarted a movement, there is nothing illogical or even improbable about that at all. You know, I mean, it is a very rational idea. And I mean, things like that have happened. The point, you know, where I come from is the earliest Christians didn't seem to believe that. They believed the opposite. And even if there was a guy, the stories that we have to work with are not based on a guy. They're based on older myths. And that's where my podcast focuses on, is not really the religion, but the myths behind the religion. So if we found out tomorrow, we suddenly get a first century historian writing about Jesus, and we find out, oh, he was a real guy, it actually wouldn't really change the content of my episodes concerning a lot of these scriptures, because what we have in these scriptures is still based on older myths. You know, and that's really the topic of most of my discussions. So yeah, I mean, there could have been. I'm not going to say it's impossible. It seems improbable based on the evidence that we have. New evidence could certainly change those probabilities. But for the purpose of my study, it doesn't actually matter if there was, because I'm studying the myths behind the stories, not the people behind them.
Right.
So.
Well, that's something I just find fascinating, that some people they seem to really get into whether or not, I don't understand maybe I'm missing the importance of whether he was a real person or not.
Right. And the discussion is really only happening within the atheist community. And you have atheists who are like, yeah, there's no real evidence for him. And atheists who were like, it had to have started with a guy. And sometimes the arguments are quite heated, as vicious as anything you'll see from any two theists. And it's actually kind of humorous, because I really don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just interested in the cool story.
You know, it's funny you say that, because recently I heard of, I don't know, I just kind of heard of a little tiny bit of a potential flame war between a couple of atheist content creators in the YouTube verse, almost specifically over this topic. There was a lot of anger and angst between these two, which turned into a lot of harsh language, which turned into you know,
over this thing.
Yeah, I guess it is. It's like watching a train wreck as you drive by. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
For that morbid sense.
Right.
Hey, Ethan, what are your thoughts, brother? Jesus, no Jesus.
So I would lean on the side that Jesus of Nazareth, with no supernatural attachment, did exist. But I still have a lot to learn. Like, I am woefully uneducated in this area.
Gotcha. Me too. Well, that was one of the reasons why I went and watched Dr. Carrier's work before actually having him, or even knowing to have him on the show. And that kind of convinced me based on what he said. But again, I have to say this over and over again. I never once went and looked up any contrary information that proves. So that's why I'm just kind of, I thought someday I'll get to Bart Ehrman, but I never got there yet. I need to apparently.
Yeah, and you anytime there's any sort of topic you're interested in, you should get as much material from well-respected sources as possible, regardless of their views. On something like this, you should read as much as you can from Price and Carrier, David Fitzgerald, Bart Ehrman, anyone else who writes on the topic and is well-educated. You should read as much as possible.
I need to get Richard Price on the show. I've seen him around here on other content creators shows, and I know these people. I could get his info. I need to get him on the show. I'm making a note. Richard Price.
Robert M. Price is a walking encyclopedia of biblical knowledge. That's all there is to it.
Forgive me for not knowing, what is his position? Is he a mythicist?
He's sort of like a tentative mythicist. He said that let's see, his view, I think I can quote it directly, is if there was a historical Jesus, there isn't anymore. Basically stating that all we have left are the myths, and we don't have anything of the historical man. And he said, so there could have been a guy, but we don't have anything left of that guy.
Except the tip of his penis.
Right. Like 3 of them that he had or something. And like
6 different churches.
Cross beams he was nailed to, which some are in the rafters of churches and stuff like that. Door lintels and everything else.
True.
Let's see. Where were we on
Shira?
Yeah.
I'm not really
I think we had talked about the Emmanuel prophecy.
No, I don't think we'd gotten there, did we? Had we? Emmanuel? Talking about where he says cries out to Emmanuel, or
so
we hadn't gotten there.
It's like Isaiah 7:14, I believe.
Okay, maybe you threatened to get there. Carry on.
Okay, I threatened it. Okay, I'll follow up with my threat.
Okay.
So in there, Asherah is called the mother of Yahweh, and it says that in that passage it says, a virgin shall give birth to a son, and you shall name him Emmanuel, which Christians would later, for some reason, even though that passage isn't supposed to be talking about some future born Messiah, it's talking about a person born around that time. For some reasons, Christians latch onto that. They go through the whole Bible, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and they grab that passage for some reason, and they try to apply it to Jesus. And that may seem like it makes no sense, but if you understand that Asherah is supposed to be the mother of Yahweh, and they are recasting these characters with Mary as the mother of Jesus, then suddenly it makes a bit more sense why they would grab this passage and say that it's referring to Jesus and Mary. And so that's another thing. And of course, Asherah, her consort, was El Elyon, the God Most High.
Of course.
Read in the New Testament, who is Jesus's father, or Mary's consort? You have God Most High, which is the literal translation of the name El Elyon, mentioned as Jesus's father in both Mark 5:7 and Luke 1:32. Yeah, Luke 1:32, both of which say that the father of Jesus is the God Most High, El Elyon. So we have another one of these very peculiar parallels. And we also have this annunciation scene, where an angel pops up to inform Mary, hey, you're going to be the mother of God. We have a very peculiar one that pops up in the infancy gospel of James. This is not a canonical gospel, but canonical just means that one group likes it and another group, or one group likes it, and another group doesn't. That's all that canonical means. Because some things that are canonical in one Bible are not canonical in another. So there's no reason to dismiss something because it's non-canonical. It just means that it didn't make the final cut, but early Christians did like the infancy gospel of James. It was important to many of them. And there's an annunciation scene in there in which the angel tells Mary that she will become pregnant by El Elyon, not the Holy Spirit. We actually have early Christians for several centuries saying the Holy Spirit could not impregnate Mary because they say the Holy Spirit is female. And that gets into a whole nother discussion. Early Christians understood the Holy Spirit as being female. And in Proverbs 8, we have, I'm sorry. So anyway, that goes to also confirm that Mary's consort is El Elyon, the same as Asherah's consort. Another parallel comes, we see in Proverbs 8 with Asherah dancing and rejoicing before El Elyon. And in the infancy gospel of James, the same one we just mentioned, we see the same scene. Mary is dancing, this time before the high priest in the temple, who is supposed to be the earthly representative of God. So we have an earthly, a sort of earthly recreation of this heavenly scene with Mary playing the role of Asherah. Why is Mary hanging out at the Jerusalem temple? Asherah was linked with weaving, and she's often depicted with a spindle of yarn. In that gospel, Mary is one of the virgins who was tasked with spinning yarn to weave a new tapestry for the Holy of Holies. And in that that particular version of the Annunciation scene in the Gospel of James, it became so popular with early Christians that about half of the icons of the Annunciation scene depict Mary as a woman holding a spindle of yarn, exactly as we have with ancient depictions of Asherah. So the images between early depictions of Mary and ancient depictions of Asherah are essentially showing the same figure. And when we're seeing it in this mythology, they're being cast in the same role. And Mary's last appearance in the Bible comes in Revelation, I believe 12:1, I think, somewhere around that, Revelation 12. And in that depiction, it said she is clothed with the sun, and she is wearing stars as jewelry. This matches up exactly with ancient descriptions of Asherah, who is clothed in sunlight or even depicted as the sun and wears sometimes a necklace or almost like a tiara of stars. Her jewelry is made of stars. And so we have the exact same imagery of Asherah in a different sort of depiction of her, again used for Mary. And we have Mary is also called the Mother of God, another name for Asherah. She's called the Queen of Heaven, another distinctive title of Asherah. No other goddess in Canaanite mythology was called the Queen of Heaven. She nurses the King of the world, exactly the same as Mary. She's clothed in sunlight. Same thing. Early hymns to Mary call her a well-shaded tree, a tree of delectable fruit, and an ever-flowing river. These things are also descriptions of the goddess Asherah, who is sometimes symbolized as a giant fruit tree, and her wisdom flows like an eternal river. That pops up throughout Canaanite mythology.
I may have to look into Canaanite mythology. I've never looked into it at all. So a lot of this is absolutely brand new to me. I'd never heard.
And I cover a lot of this on my show.
Do you see? Okay, more links to his show down below. Really quick, I want to say thank you to Derek Cruz for $2 of support to the channel. He said it was a great show today. Thank you for that, Derek. So all this is kind of new to me. I may have to dip in and look at some of that. It's like
books have been written about this, just this
The
one
relation.
topic about
Really?
Asherah and Mary. And also that Asherah worship was quite prominent in Israel. She was actually called the Lady of Jerusalem, and the Spirit of Wisdom and other things. And she actually appears numerous times in the Old Testament. She was a prominent figure, but they kind of got rid of her. And then later she was recast as Mary.
I would genuinely love to see you and Nathaniel from Divine Disbelief talk.
Me too. I would enjoy
opposing positions, and you both have so much information. I think it would definitely make for a great conversation.
Absolutely, because he's the one who, like I was talking about, he's quite passionate about the belief that Jesus was a real person. Right. Now, I'm sure he's an atheist and he doesn't believe Jesus had supernatural powers, blah, 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 blah. But it's my understanding that he's quite passionate about the... I don't know how long he's been into it. How long have you been doing this?
I've been studying the origins of the Bible for, I want to say, about 10 years now. As far as the podcast, maybe about 4, I believe, something like that. My studies have definitely intensified since I got the idea for the podcast. I'm now going through about 3 books a month on these topics.
Really?
Which you can see on the shelf, behind my head. About half of those books came from listeners. I put a wish list, and listeners just flooded me with books. I got like $300 worth of books in 1 month. I actually had to ask them to slow it down a bit.
Really?
So, wow. yeah, it's amazing. I have the best listeners in the world.
That's awesome. I guess real quick, Yuri Bench made a point here, since we're talking about Jesus and stuff. Yuri Bench is actually in Israel, and he says his uncle lives in a village where, according to the Christian faith, Jesus's mother was born. They produce olive oil, which, according to their belief, is the best in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, that actually became really big in Constantine's time. His mother, Constantine's mother, was like super duper Christian, and she decided she was going to find all of the places mentioned in the Bible and stuff like that. I think it was his mother. Anyway, she basically just went on like a crusade and turned the Holy Land into a giant tourist trap. In a very short period of time. She, with no real knowledge of what any of this stuff was supposed to be, she would just go out, point to a place, and say, "That's where Mary was born. Build a temple there. And this is where Jesus was born. Build a church there." And then she went to Babylon, and then came back with 3 boxes of bones and said, "These are the skeletons of the 3 wise men. Here are their names.
Really?
Put them on display." And it's like, first off, it's never said how many there were. Second, their names are never mentioned. It never says where they came from. None of this. She just went and found like 3 corpses and dug them up and said, "These are these people who, are meant to symbolize something else." And it's like,
or she fell for all the schemes in the tourist trap. So she went there and somebody was like, "Hey, check it out. I got these 3 skeletons. Did you know?"
Yeah,
and for the cut rate price of only...
Right.
If you'll just give me your credit card number, we'll give you these 3 skeletons.
Yeah. And so the Near East is like this giant, religious theme park. A great deal of that can be attributed to I believe it was the mother of Constantine. And it happened over a very short period of time. And she had like no evidence or anything to back up any of this. She just pointed and said, "This is a thing, make it popular and charge admission." And that's where a lot of that comes from.
Well, I knew that, of course, I've already talked about the the various different artifacts of Jesus, that, the 6 different, and the different, So I've never heard about somebody going along and just doing that specifically, almost like starting their own attraction rides over at this place.
Yeah, she just went on a massive road trip and just started, designated spots as being some place that they found in the Bible. And then, like, I believe in the 1700s, 1800s, this also happened with archaeologists. A bunch of evangelical Christians would go to the Holy Land and start digging in the dirt. If they found something, they were like, this is, and they would like flip to a page in the Bible and pick a name, this city, and then move on to someplace else.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
The Blazing Wizard Pope would like to ask you: have you found any sort of? Wait. Before I do that, I think Phil Lister suggests. I think perhaps the name of the lady was Helen. Is that the mother of Constantinople?
It might have been.
Possibly.
I don't really study much about that part because I'm mainly interested in like the mythology behind it, which all happened much earlier.
Gotcha. He says Constantine's mother Helen has a lot of roads named after her. Gotcha. It was Constantine's mother. Yes. Okay. So now back to Blazing Wizard Pope's question: have you found any sort of Moam, mother of all myths, in your research? I guess that would be Jesus or Mary, literally Mary, the mother of all myths. Are you
talking about one that got like really big, or one that sort of seems to be like the progenitor of all of them, like like they all share like one common ancestor?
I'm not sure. Pick one.
Okay, actually, that's perfect because this would segue straight into a talk about Noah, which you want to talk about because of the Epic of Gilgamesh. So we kill two birds with one stone.
Yes. And Ethan may have to duck out here in just a moment. Ethan, just say the word and I'll flip the switch and you can go away, okay? And we'll let Jason continue to drop knowledge.
Cool. Okay, so, and Ethan, if you want to learn more about some of the different, mythological origins and stuff, definitely check out my podcast. And in some coming episodes that'll be dropping later this year, I will be going a great deal into the New Testament. Okay. Right now I'm working on the Book of Enoch, which is crucial in understanding the New Testament. And I explain that, in those episodes. But hit me up on Facebook and I can give you a quick little guide to it.
Awesome.
So anyway, mother of all myths. So let's take a quick look because this is a perfect illustration of that, of like one myth that kind of spread out and became a bunch of different things. So let me give you a couple quick details about the flood story. Okay. I made a quick list out of them. So God decides to kill all mankind in a flood. One man is chosen to continue the human race and save the animals. He's commanded to build a boat. He's given dimensions measuring its length and width and height in cubits. He builds a boat and is told to do it out of wood and pitch. It's divided into multiple compartments. 2 of every animal is loaded onto the boat. His God comes down from heaven to close the door, which seals them in. A great storm rolls in. The waters rise. A depth measured as 15 cubits is mentioned in the story. A great wind is sent by God. All humans on earth die. The man opens a window. He releases a raven and a dove to find land. The boat lands on top of a mountain. He opens the door and releases the livestock. He builds a sacrificial altar. He sacrifices some animals. His God delights in the smell of burning meat. And then a decision is made to never again flood the earth and kill off all of mankind.
Joe Pesci.
Do you recognize that story?
The story of Joe Pesci.
I don't believe so. I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
All right.
I don't
Might be off just a little.
Yeah, just
miss, swing and a miss. Okay.
So that's the Noah story, right?
Well, yes. Actually, it is the Noah story. That is true.
Okay. Now, why did you go? What made you hesitant about saying yes?
Because I know it's actually the story of Gilgamesh, and I just didn't want to spoil your giveaway.
Okay.
I was like, do I screw up his story, or do I just play along? I decided to play along.
Hey,
it's the story of Noah.
Yeah, well, it is the story of Noah, and it's the story of Gilgamesh, because the stories are so similar that the first person who was translating it thought he was reading the oldest copy of the Noah story ever written, and then he found out it wasn't. And so all of those details can be found in both of those stories. There's very little difference between the Noah story and the story of Utnapishtim, Utnapishtim, which is it was actually a separate myth that kind of got shoehorned into the Epic of Gilgamesh, because Epic of Gilgamesh is sort of almost like a short story collection, and they string it together like one continuous narrative. Anyway, the story of Utnapishtim got jammed in there, and because it was in the Epic of Gilgamesh, it became an extremely widely known myth, because the Epic of Gilgamesh was translated into multiple languages and distributed throughout the Mediterranean world. It was like Stephen King. Everybody was reading the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, the Utnapishtim story and the Noah's flood story is actually based on a real event. It actually happened, but not the way the story describes it. The whole world wasn't flooded. It was one river, the Euphrates. And what happened was during the Jimdat Nasur period, this is about 5,000 years ago, there was a city called Shuruppak, Shuruppak, in what would be modern-day Kuwait. And this was on the Euphrates River. And now people at that time mostly lived and died within, a dozen miles of where they were born. And so their entire world, and some of them actually held this belief, the entire world could be viewed from the walls of their city. I mean, they thought the world was very small because most people didn't travel. And so when a giant flood comes in and it's like 22 feet deep and it kills most of the people in the city because, swimming is fairly recent in our history. Most pirates didn't even know how to swim. If you fell overboard, you just died. So, these people, when the area around them flooded, to them, this was the entire world because they thought you could see to the edge of the world with a firmament connected. They didn't know it was this giant, globe. And so this giant flood that happened around 5,000 years ago that killed a bunch of people, it was very catastrophic to them, and it spawned a myth concerning the wrath of the gods, that their city was being too noisy, and so the gods decided to wipe them out. And that this is an early Mesopotamian myth concerning this flood. And this myth, it grew in complexity as it spread, and it created a multitude of different myths. One of the earliest is one about a man named Ziusudra, Ziusudra. And this became an early Mesopotamian myth about this flood. And it had a lot of these details that more closely connect it to the actual flood of Shuruppak. It spread even more. It went to more places. And another myth was spawned called the myth of Atrahasis, Atrahasis. And more details are added. This thing grew and spread and touched more cultures. More cultures made it their own. And eventually you get the story of Utnapishtim. That story then made its way into the Epic of Gilgamesh, where it reached pretty much its final form and had all the details we mentioned earlier. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it was passed around and copied and translated and eventually made its way all the way to Israel, where we actually found fragments of it near Megiddo that date back to like the 14th or 15th century BC. So it predates the Noah story by hundreds or close to 1,000 years at that point. So they were reading it, and this myth, this actual flood and the myths it spawned is sort of like a mother of all myths for the flood story. It came from one event where a handful of cities on the Euphrates flooded, and then it grew and spread over the course of about 1,500 years until it finally reached Israel, where the most popular version of the myth, the Noah story, was put into the most popular book ever published. And so, yeah, there is sort of a mother of all myths, and a lot of it comes from ancient Sumer. Most of it goes back to Mesopotamia.
Well, those that they are, so it's either Mesopotamia, Sumer, or the Canaanites. I mean, they were just ripping off their religion from everywhere. Yeah, or the Egyptians. We can't forget the Egyptians.
Don't forget the Egyptians, the Babylonians. Greek and Roman influence plays a big role later. Actually, a lot of the story of Saul and David, we find parallels to it in the Iliad. The story of David and Goliath and their fight is actually a sort of reworking of the story of Hector and Achilles, though parts of it are sort of reversed to show a different cultural view by the Israelites. And so, yeah, there's all sorts of influences, but a great many of them go back to the earliest days of civilization in Mesopotamia.
Here, I had me muted so I could talk. That's interesting. Now, see, for a long time, I've known about everybody knows about Gilgamesh, right? As I mentioned, but the details of how detailed the story of Gilgamesh is compared to what we know, because I just went through Genesis 2 and 3 and 5 and 6 or whichever one. I think it was 5 and 6 where we hit Noah.
Yeah.
And I just went through that. And everything you said, I mean, the dove, the raven, the door. Now, I don't remember, and this is maybe just that I don't remember. I don't remember the Lord closing the top of the ark. But I'm using the NIV.
Okay.
Ever so humbly.
I have issues with that one, which I could go into. And so I'm not. I don't remember if it's in the NIV because some of the later stuff. They don't like some of the direct actions, because they want God to be sort of removed and, up in his heaven. And so some of these things kind of get toned down or taken out, or an angel does it. But in our oldest copies, you either have God, like Yahweh, because that's one of the stories about Yahweh, not El Elyon. You have Yahweh coming down to do it, and in others, it's an angel of Yahweh who comes down and actually shuts the door for him. But it's not in every version. Some later versions isn't in there at all, either by accident or by deliberate omission.
I see. Well, we have a special guest on the show. Briefly, this is what's your
Band-Aid?
It's Band-Aid.
Band-Aid. Say hi.
Oh, that's the Freddy Krueger cat that gives out lacerations.
Yes, that would be him. Although he's now quite loving. But yeah, he was a very violent cat growing up.
Aren't they all? It's their job, I think.
All cats do that to me. Like every cat on earth hates me.
He has 2 criminal records against him. Not joking. He unfortunately hospitalized my ex because it was so bad.
Wow.
And she ended up having to see a hand specialist. And once you go to the doctor, legally they have to report it.
Right.
So I had to. Yeah. So he's got 2 strikes against him.
Oh.
But
2 strikes.
He doesn't do that anymore.
What's the second strike?
Oh, it was 2 different times.
A repeat offender.
Oh yeah. Like the first 2 years I had him, it was just gashes here, everywhere. But it took a lot of patience and love. And
you need like those falconer's gloves that are made out of like elk hide or something.
I used to have to walk up to him like, okay, Band-Aid, it's okay. Like slowly give him my hand, like, okay. Like he was a jerk.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. I had a couple cats one time, a brother-sister pair that I picked up. A long time ago, a Tinker and Belle. And since then, though, I haven't had a cat. It's been all dogs for me. I'm really a dog person. Me and dogs. Dogs are my favorite people.
Yeah.
And they grow to larger sizes, so if civilization collapses, I'll have a food supply. I mean, it'll be like weeks of food for these little fat bastards. But cats, you have to get more cats. I don't want that many cats to provide that much food. Okay, never mind.
See, I would just eat my neighbors. Like I would share my neighbors with my dog. That's
true. We iron. Hey, Rob, you're looking awful skinny.
My dog is my baby.
Yeah. I joke about that. I've always joked about that, but I love our dogs. Our dogs are wonderful. I would never.
Yeah. We threaten to eat my dog all the time.
No collapse of civilization needed.
I do have to get to work, gentlemen. So,
okay, sir.
Dragons and Genesis, it was a pleasure meeting you.
Chris, same here.
As always, it's always great co-hosting with you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you. And guys, Ethan's links are below, so don't forget to go subscribe to Ethan. He's also listed in. That's awesome. No, you go ahead.
And also, right now, 31 people are watching on YouTube, but there's only 19 likes. So that means 12 more people need to hit that like button.
You guys are slackers. You're slackers.
Get on it. Click that like button. Subscribe. All that good stuff. And have a good one, guys.
Thank you, Ethan.
Take it easy.
See you next week. All right, I can do this. There we go. You were saying.
Let
me catch up real quick and see if there's anything in the chat. We were talking about cats. Got distracted. Do you have cats?
No, cats hate me. People say, they'll say, oh yeah, I have a bunch of cats, and this one cat right here is really sweet and it would never scratch anyone. That every one of those cats I've ever met has scratched me or bit me. So I don't even touch cats anymore. When people have cats, I ignore them, because if I touch them, then I get clawed or bit or something. So I just, it's like, I'll pet it if I have to. I'll give it food if it needs it, but I prefer not to, interact with razor blades. So, I have a dog and I have snakes.
There you go.
Because North American snakes, unless it's venomous, they can't really hurt you. Like even like an 8-foot long rat snake, if it bites you, it's not even as bad as a cat scratch. Even if it like clamps on and chews a bit, you're like, what are you doing? What are you doing here? It does nothing. But they're real easy to tame down, and they never go, psycho on you.
They don't scratch you with their paws.
Right. They have a distinct lack of limbs.
They do. Yes. Cat. I understand where you're coming from cats. I'm not disparaging any cat owners out there, but I've had cats. They come up and they love you. They rub on your leg and they're like, I love you. And you reach down to pet them. They roll over and start this die kind of thing. And I'm like, I don't know. I thought you wanted me to pet you.
Or see with me, I pet the cat exactly how I'm instructed to pet it. And as soon as my fingers make contact, it spins around and bites me. And I'm like, and then people say, what would you do? I'm like, I touched it like you told me to. So I just don't touch them.
But dogs.
Oh, dogs.
What kind of dogs what kind of wiggle butt do you have?
Mine is especially wiggly because he's really long. He's a black lab basset hound mix.
Really?
Yeah.
He's not there, is he?
My girlfriend has him out for a walk right now.
Okay. I understand. But he's welcome on the show anytime.
Oh yeah, if he heard that, he would be in my lap because he thinks he's a tiny puppy and he's not. He weighs about 40 pounds. He looks like a 6-month-old black lab with long ears, but when he stands up, he doesn't really get any taller because his legs are like super short. We measured his legs and his ears are the same length. They're both 6 inches. He's adorable and he's really wiggly. And he has a really expressive face. So you can tell what he's thinking just by his facial expressions. Very disapproving sometimes. We do something wrong, and he just like,
he'll look at you.
And then he looks over his glasses. He got that from my girlfriend. He'll like look over, or he'll roll his eyes at you. And it's like, how do you know how to do this? You're a dog. Quit it,
I've got one that'll, she used to wink at me when I wink, because I'd wink at her and she'd wink back. Yeah. And Sadie, which is the same dog, actually, she's a little, she looks like a little miniature golden retriever. And she will get up on after, we'll sit here watching movies and she'll get and sit with me and then she'll look at me and I'll pet her. And she's just I love that dog. She's wonderful. I never thought I'd be she's actually a Cavapoo, a part Cavalier King Charles and a part poodle, and that's what she really is. And I never would have thought I'd want one of those dogs.
Yeah,
but I love her. She's one. I would gladly, if there weren't so many dogs out there who needed homes, I would gladly just clone my dogs and just, if one of them dies, just pop her back in and get another. I would love to do that, but too many dogs out there need homes, really.
See, I think that if I were ever given the powers of God, I would swap the life expectancy of dogs and politicians. So when someone gets elected to office, you only got them for maybe like 15 years tops. But dogs, you get to keep them your whole life. And I think we'd have a much better world.
Well, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you get so much more value out of a pet than you do a politician.
Right.
Unless, of course, you're a corporation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you get more value out of a pet than most people, to be honest.
Okay.
I have a very dim view of people.
Yes, okay, me too. I don't like people on the general. Yeah. I have a request. It's from Miss Kristen, best name ever. The name of the mixed breed again is a Cavapoo. Cavalier King Charles and a poodle, a Cavapoo. She's one of, I mean, they're out there. You've seen them. When I close the show, and we'll be done here in just a minute. Yes, life is a series of dogs. That's true. When I close the show, in the credits, you'll see my patrons, and then it'll come to a page that shows my production staff, which is my doggies. So you'll see my dogs there. And they're wonderful. One of them is a Cavapoo. One of them is a Bocker, which is a half boxer, half bulldog. Sorry. Gotcha. Bulldog Bocker. She looks like a miniature black lab. She's the one that's named Daisy. Yeah. I mean, looks like a mini black lab. So I look like I got a mini golden retriever, a little furry golden retriever mini, a mini black lab. We also have Jack. Jack is some sort of mixed dog, but he looks to the eye like a miniature whippet or greyhound. And then we've got Bailey. She's our muddiest mud of all the mutts. Let me just check it out. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I want to mention again for everybody that your podcast, yes, Stidix, it is a podcast for, thank you, Insulin Shocker. It is a podcast for the Dragons in Genesis. We're trying to convince him to do a YouTube channel. Someday he may move that direction.
If I somehow find more time and it instantly consumed by adopting a new hobby, then I'll start a YouTube channel.
Gotcha. Yes. That would be. I'm sure a lot of people would enjoy it, especially with your content. Kathy Leto says she get $5 of support for the channel and says I will get $5 from her every time I show a cat on the show. So is it like boiled,
just have a parade of
fried? in what form do you want your? No, I kid. Actually, I'm a big animal supporter, so yes, cats are all okay. I before I go, I want to tell you a quick story about cats and my jokes about cats, because I'm not for harming any animals really. So in my original Match profile, I did online dating before I got married. In my original Match profile, I made a joke about how I enjoyed cats, but their little whiskers got in my teeth. And that made my wife laugh as she was lying in bed one night scrolling through her Match. She read my profile, and that little cat joke about cats and having whiskers and was one of the things that actually attracted to me. And
there you go. It takes all kinds.
I owe something to cats. I think they have to be different cats. That's possible. Grumpy. Oh yeah, tons of mice. Tons of mice is a person in the chat, or a ton of mice in the chat, and they obviously don't really particularly care for the cats. So I want to go ahead and wrap up the show. Thank you, Jason, for joining us on the show again. You are amazing.
Thank you.
We'll pick another topic and have you on down the road, and we'll do this again. Absolutely,
that works.
Thank you to all the people in the chat. The damnation I'm loving that. That's wonderful. They're calling them. Yeah, I didn't start it. They started it. It's wonderful. You guys, Native Atheist, he stole it. I stole it from him. Thank you guys for being on the show and joining us and making it all wonderful. You guys have a wonderful day. Tomorrow we're going to have Daniel Reynoso, very similar to Jason here. Jason, you actually might need to meet Daniel because you guys really spout that biblical knowledge. You drop it hard.
Okay.
This guy, nice. I mean, he knows all manner of stuff. He's wonderful. I thought it was really fortunate for me to have both of you guys back to back on a week where I'm trying to avoid some burnout. So I kind of don't really have to do a lot. I just sit here and let you guys talk.
Yeah. Anytime you want me back on, just let me know. Awesome. And I'll make sure that I'm home. So yeah, we can do that.
Well, we'll take you in the truck too as best you can. So thank you very much.
So and, just pick a topic or just pick a Bible story that you want to learn about and let me know.
Absolutely. So. We can do that. We can theme it up. Sounds like
cool.
a plan. You like salt? We got a lot's wife for you. Anyway, you guys have a great day. We will see you tomorrow. Thank you again, Jason.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching the show. A special shout out to my gold level Patreon supporters, the Blazing Wizard Pope, Ian Davenport, Cindy Plaza, and tons of mice. Thank you and have a great day.